Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Mixed Martial Arts. My name is Austin Shaper. This is going to be our very first World War III geopolitical segment. There's so much to cover and so much that I want to talk about. This is going to be a lot of rambling. I'm just going to be upfront about that because just an overwhelming amount of events, and I'm a little backed up because I have not shared my thoughts on really any of the things that have been going on within the past few weeks or months. I'm going to be all over the place. It is Thursday morning, I think around like 10:45 or so. I'm going to try to get this episode out later today. But yeah, bear with me. So right off the bat, why am I calling this World War III? It's very evident we're not in World War III right now, right? You'd think that's an obvious point, but I do see all over the internet people saying we're already in World War III. I see it every day. I think that's a bit ludicrous. Now, the perspective that we are going to look back in time and we're going to say that these events that have taken place with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and these events with Taiwan and China and all these different things going on, we may be able to look back in hindsight and say those were the events that started World War III, therefore that was World War III, the beginning of it. That's a fair point, though I don't think we can say that right now. I don't think it's fair to say we're in World War III. The reason why I say these segments on my show are related to World War III is because I do believe ultimately it's a 100% eventuality. I shouldn't say 100%, 99.99% eventuality that these events are going to drag us into a global war at some point, be it 3 weeks from now, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Maybe we get lucky and it's a decade from now. I don't know if I'm that optimistic, but it's possible. Anything's possible, but that being said, I do think it's an eventuality, and I think a lot of these global events taking place right now are the precursor. Doesn't mean we're in it right now. I think you would know if we were in it right now because it would be very violent all over the globe. But we're tracking in that direction. So it's crazy, and off the bat, I suppose I should explain what is my interest in this. Why do I want to talk about something so dark and dismal? It's not because I enjoy it. I don't enjoy talking about something as terrible as these global events and war. But I do have like a fascination with it because I think this for me stems back to World War II, my interest in geopolitics. I don't care so much for domestic politics. I think it's a big clown show and a lot of it is just a joke, to be honest. And it's something more for the public than, point being, it's not really where my interest lies, but the geopolitical theater does intrigue me because I think it affects people in such a huge degree when it goes bad, and it's going real bad. And my interest stems from World War II because I, for some reason, a few years ago, caught the World War II bug and just became really fascinated with how World War II unfolded, and really got into buying books and reading about people's personal experiences and their diaries and all that. And it just like shook me to my core about how decisions made by a few people, a few powerful people, a few governments can compound and turn into something that affects the everyday life of a normal person that's just trying to raise a family and have a job and live a normal life, and they get sucked into these giant geopolitical events that are out of their control, and somehow they play a part in. It's fucking crazy. And World War II for me was the kind of precursor that got me interested in that, I guess you would say, because I saw it's interesting because World War II was a quote unquote righteous war, in a meaning that there was kind of the good guys versus the bad guys. And I'm not saying it's 100% black and white. There's obviously nuances and everything, but very much so compared to any other war that you've seen, the Iraq War, Vietnam War, the Cold War, Korean War, et cetera, et cetera. There's, I think it's fair to say that the World War II was the last like almost complete black and white war, whereas it's like there was a moral cause on the Allied side versus the Axis side had some nefarious ass dark plans for the world, and had they succeeded, our world would have looked very different. So you could say it was kind of a noble war. And I think that that's very much changed. And as I said before, not only do I think it's an eventuality that this war is coming, but this war is very different from previous ones because I believe this is bad guys versus bad guys. Almost kind of like the European front was in World War II from the Russians versus the Germans. It was bad guy versus bad guy. And I think World War III is going to be exactly that. So, yeah, World War II got me interested into following these things because it's just crazy to see how something so out of your control can affect people's lives in the most extreme way when it all goes bad. And when it all went bad back then, nukes were just being developed. They didn't have the capability to wipe each other out like they do so easily at the push of a button like we do now. It's an absolute miracle it hasn't already happened. It kind of blows my mind, especially when you got superpowers so close to going at it. Being, NATO and Russia, they're so close, and yet they're teetering this line, and yet no one's fired a nuke. I think that gives us cause for a little optimism. But I'm hesitant to say that that's too good of a thing because I think every day we're tracking in and out. I do see something that I would like to address before I kind of dive into the most recent events. Something I'd like to address is this A or B type thinking when it comes to everything involved with this geopolitical front. Let's just start with Ukraine and Russia for one. It seems like there's one side of it that thinks, unprovoked attack. Russia had zero right to do this. This is totally just an evil conquest. Putin is equivalent to Hitler, and he has plans to conquer all of Europe and then turn his eyes to conquering NATO and, dominating the world as if he's the next Hitler. And then you have Team B that thinks that Putin, because there's a lot of people domestically here in America and probably around the world that so don't support the American government anymore, justly in a lot of ways, but they so don't support what goes on here anymore that it's almost like they're such contrarians to whatever the agenda is of the American government or the American government's adversaries. If it's the opposite of what America wants, then they're backing it. And so what I mean by that is this Team B thinks that Putin is somehow a liberator of Europe and he's there to kill the Nazis, and he was provoked into this attack, and this is a defensive attack. He had to do this. What got you here? Everything from he's going to be biologically attacked to they were trying to assassinate him to he's there to end the deep state and he's allied with Trump, yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on and on. I think, as I said a moment ago, these topics are nuanced, and to put things in this simplistic A or B type thinking is just absurd. It's absurd. We can start with this point. What Putin did is evil and wrong. It's terrible. And I think it's crazy when you see online that, like I said, people have such a distrust in the American government, myself included, though, that they somehow find themselves like agreeing with America's enemies about anything. And I think that's like a slippery slope. And it blows my mind because when the war first started, a year and a half ago, roughly, and the invasion started, was it like February of last year? Yeah, February of last year. There was a lot of sympathy, or empathy, I guess you could say, as far as what the civilian population and even the Ukrainian soldiers were dealing with because of obvious reasons. We're seeing this crazy footage. We're seeing people dying on a daily basis and their homes getting destroyed, their cities getting leveled, awful stuff. Through time, I think the population has become very callous to it, and I see some just awful opinions out there on the internet who just don't show any mercy for the population. One thing you got to keep in perspective, the civilian population's got damn near nothing to do with this, and if you found yourself in the situation that these Ukrainians find themselves in, I think you would feel 100% different about it, and you wouldn't be cracking jokes on Twitter about the, about the deaths and just the terrible things going on. So I want to preface it by saying that what Putin did is awful. And to be honest, yes, I do think that he was provoked in a large part with NATO's expansion, and I forget the name of the treaty, was in the 90s, about not 1 inch farther. NATO was not going to expand eastward, and look how that turned out. We're right on their border, and Russia sees that as an existential threat, and I think it's fair to say that America would also not love if we found China or Russia on our borders, let's say, again, in Cuba or Mexico. with military bases, etc. I think we could have a similar reaction. I don't know if we'd be invading, but you know what I mean. It's not black and white, but it is awful what Putin did, and that needs to be said. And it's a shame that people kind of forget that, because whether he was provoked or not, my opinion, it's taking it to a whole new level. Whether you are provoked politically, I don't think there was any evidence to say NATO was going to take some offensive attack and nuke Russia or invade Russia the way that Russia is invading Ukraine. I think, I'm open to hearing different viewpoints, but I think that's absurd. So while he was provoked, it does not give you the right to go kill people, and especially innocent people, and then ironically turn around and say you are liberating these people. Yeah, you're liberating them from living, perhaps, but you're not doing anything right by them. You're destroying their cities, and you're involving people that, this is the way this geopolitical theater has always been. People getting involved with it that have nothing to do with it and can barely make ends meet, and they're getting dragged into war. It's fucking crazy. And then the people who are starting these wars and encouraging them, along with these defense contractors, are profiting off of it. And not only are they profiting, but they're not the ones participating. I don't see any of our senators who are sending money that way without a vote from the populace. I don't see them on the front lines defending the country. I see them with a lot of talk, and pocketing money on it, and then they send the innocent people to go die. Probably not saying anything new. That's the way war has always been, but it's truly awful. So I hate the A or B type thinking. I don't subscribe to either of those. And as I preface, and I will preface at the beginning of all my episodes, I'm no expert. I truly am not. I'm not an authority or a historian. I simply am just in awe at where we are in this world. I think we're being primed for this war. I think we're being step by step inched closer towards it, and the population is being normalized and conditioned to accept it when it comes. I think you can see some of the same similarities in World War II. I forget who was in office at the time, but I remember watching a video of him saying, if you get me into office, your boys, your American boys, will not be dying in a European war. Fast forward 6 months later, they're all dying in a European war. So you heard Biden say, was it earlier this year or perhaps late last year, he was interviewed talking about, the assistance being provided to Ukraine, and said, we're not going to be providing tanks, we're not going to be providing long-range missiles, and we're not going to be providing jets such as F-16s, because what did he say? Do not be mistaken, people. Do not be fooled. That means World War III. He said it crystal clear. You can go back and watch it. And sure enough, here we are a year and a half into the war, and all three of those categories have been met. Long-range weapons have been sent, missiles. We're now training the pilots and sending F-16 jets, NATO is, and all those things are taking place. The tanks are there, all that. So it's fucking crazy to see how, the way it's unfolding, and some of the opinions I see about, this isn't World War III is because it hasn't happened yet. That was my initial expectation. I was pretty surprised initially when this started off in February of last year that within a month or two it didn't turn into a NATO-Russia war. I was really shocked by that, and it made me realize that, this shit isn't like a movie. I keep dropping my stand. This shit is not like a movie, and just because it's not happening in the time frame that people would expect, it's kind of slowly, tit for tat, going back and forth, and then every time that happens, the needle marker is being moved up one step closer to midnight, I guess you could say. And it's been a year and a half and we're not at war yet. That's crazy, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. It doesn't. It just means it's not fitting the kind of movie-like timeline of how we could perceive that World War III would happen. So I think it's crazy that Biden said that, and then fast forward now, you see that happening. A few things I want to dive into before we get into some reactions. The recent Nord Stream revelation. There's been a ton of back and forth, and whether you keep up with this or not, you had to have seen it at this point that obviously when Nord Stream happened, you had the Russians blaming the Ukrainians blaming the Russians, NATO blaming the Russians, and then doing multiple countries, I think like Sweden, Germany, all doing these investigations. I believe Russia was barred from doing their own investigation. And no conclusion was really given to the public. But then, was it 6 months later, you had the Seymour Hersh article come out claiming that he had evidence, that it was what did he claim? The American government providing assistance to the Ukrainian government along with Poland, something along those lines. And then later on, you're now seeing that what was the article? Let's see if I can find it. There was an article that just came out recently that said the American government had evidence. I'm surprised they would even release this, but the American government had evidence that they had to basically tell Ukraine not to go through with this attack, and they found evidence that Ukraine was planning it last year, I believe, before it took place. I think like 4 months before it took place. So you've got that, and then there's the whole concept of who benefits from this. You hear speculations on both sides. I'm not here to say who did it or who didn't do it. I think if you're just purely talking motive, it's a bit of a stretch to think that Russia has more motive than Ukraine or NATO to blow up the pipeline. I mean, you go back and you see Biden saying that they were going to take down the pipeline. That didn't look good as time went by. Not a good look to be saying that on camera. Doesn't for sure guarantee they do it, but I think if we're just talking motive, it's, I could hear the arguments that Russia did it, but I just don't know. And that's what's tricky about this fog of war, that you never really get to bottom of anything. I mean, the Ukrainian dam that just blew up last week, we don't know who did that. And again, both sides are blaming each other, and we don't have the evidence yet. I think John Kirby from the American government came out and said they're not even sure who did it yet. I found that to be interesting. I think maybe they learned a lesson from Nord Stream to not just come out and say who you think did it. Just say we're going to wait for the evidence. Maybe a wise move to do that because they stirred the pot a lot with the Nord Stream stuff. But the Ukrainian dam, it's like we don't know what happened. It's wrecking Ukraine, and I think it's also wrecking Russia because I believe that provided a lot of the water to the people of Crimea, which are, I think, considered Russian territory for now. And that's a whole other can of worms when you talk about what's going to happen if this Ukrainian offensive reaches Crimea. Is that truly going to be a red line? Or is this another red line thing for Russia where they say it is and then we push them to it and we call their bluff and they do nothing about it? It's interesting. That's kind of been what's happening recently. I find that to be interesting. However evil and bad that Putin is, it's strange how eerily reserved, I guess you could say, he's being. And I don't mean from like he's good. I'm saying like, the dude's got the most nukes of anybody in the world and he hasn't used so much as one. Could that be for just self-preservation? He believes he would be blown up, to smithereens if he fired a nuke. Sure, very possible, but I still find it interesting that he hasn't lost his shit yet with all the frustration, because who's winning the war? I don't fucking know. It depends on who you listen to. But it's clear that Russia's having a much more difficult time than they thought, and I believe they thought this war was going to be over quickly, and now it seems it may turn out into some like Afghanistan-type years-long prolonged conflict and some sort of war of attrition, and that leads to even more interesting points of who's going to be able to last longer. NATO giving these billions and billions to Ukraine as Ukrainians' military dwindles and they're not providing personnel. So I know Ukrainians' military is significantly smaller than Russia's. So at what point does it get to this thing where, NATO has to be like, okay, shit, they're running out of actual people to use these weapons. We're going to either have to get directly involved by sending our own troops, or we're going to have to reach some sort of peace treaty. And both sides tried the peace treaty thing, and it's not going to pan out. I don't see it panning out because there's just impassable things that both sides want that there's not really a middle ground on. For Russia to reach some sort of peace settlement where they take 20% of the country or something along those lines, I think that's not going to look good for them because they've lost so many men doing this for 15% of Ukraine at the end of the day. I don't think that's going to bode well for them, whereas Ukraine is getting their confidence by the backing of NATO and mainly the American government, and now they want to go retake Crimea, which it's a fascinating topic, and I don't want to say who's right, wrong here. I think it's unjustified what Putin did, whether he was provoked or not. Simultaneously, I'm not going to sit here and say that I believe that the American government is doing this from the kindness of their heart. I don't believe that. I think that's extremely naive. I think that our government is very selective, and who they help and the reasons why they help, I think, is based on their own interest. I don't think it's these humanitarian causes. I think that's a total farce, because if that was true, we would be going back to Afghanistan to right the wrong that we did there when we evacuated, and all the other places, Yemen and all the other places we've destroyed through our policies and through our warmongering. I think it's very fascinating that they want to play the humanitarian card and, this is to defend democracy, of which I believe Ukraine is not even a democracy. So, yes, we are doing it. And let me say this, let me clear this up. I do believe it is the right thing to do morally and ethically to defend innocents being killed in any regard. But I believe this is a messy one because not only is this not black and white, but the repercussions of being involved are potentially catastrophic, because this is as close to the Cold War's, as close to World War III as we've been since the Cold War, and I would venture to say we're even closer. And that's scary because we have way worse weaponry, and the world is so much more advanced in all its technologies and its capability. The infrastructure of our society is much more fragile and complex, and that domino effect could take place. And when it does, I mean, everything from the power grid being taken out to nuke being shot off could destabilize society so quickly in a way that even World War II couldn't, and the Cuban Missile Crisis could, but that was diffused, and they seemed more willing to reach a settlement. So fascinating times we're living in. I don't know who blew the dam up. Side note, you do have the Canadian fires. I know that's not really geopolitical, but it just blows my mind because the Canadian wildfires, you see all kinds of conspiracies. I'm not here to subscribe to any of them because I just haven't been keeping up with it. But I saw New York looking like a cyberpunk post-apocalyptic world, like a dark yellow sky, a hazy sky. And then even here in Cincinnati, last week it was extremely hazy. And anytime you got on the highway, you saw the air quality alert. I think that might still be in effect. So point is, the world is at a fucking crazy point. I mean, you got the domestic shit going on. I'm not really going to dive into that today, all the shit with Trump and the presidency and the that'll be my cat Boots, all the crazy stuff going on domestically. But the only reason I bring it up is because this concoction creates a dangerous recipe: economic, societal, domestic politics, on top of the geopolitical theater of having Taiwan and China about to blow, China, United States about to blow, Russia, Ukraine currently blowing, NATO versus Russia about to blow, Iran versus Israel about to go off, North Korea versus South Korea, North Korea versus Japan, Iran versus United States, and the deal falling through. This place is a tinderbox about to fucking blow. When it's going to blow, how it's going to look like, we can only speculate upon that, and I'm not an expert, but I think it's pretty obvious to see the conditioning. We didn't used to hear about World War III a few years back. Nothing more than just, speculation based on nothing other than, the fact that one day we believe it's coming. But now look at the media's talking about it like it's on the, it's about to happen. I mean, just the other day you saw in the news, Taiwan is, the American government working with Taiwan to work on their evacuation plans for American citizens from Taiwan. They're not doing that for no reason, but they're doing that because they believe something might be coming down the pipe and quickly. And I think it's obvious that while they are conditioning us to believe it's going to happen, they don't want us to know how bad it potentially is. I think if we knew behind the scenes what the conversations these governments are having with each other and what they're planning, we wouldn't be sleeping at night. You saw the other day NATO launched their biggest air exercise ever in the history of NATO. That's not for nothing. So you just got a lot of events going on right now. You also have the Belarus tactical nukes being deployed from Russia. I believe that was a couple of days ago. And I think it's a good point to dive into some reactions because you had Lukashenko, who's the leader of Belarus. I guess you could call him the president. I'm not 100% sure on the terminology, but he talked about how he wouldn't hesitate to use these nukes and that over 1 million people would die, within a couple of seconds or a couple minutes. And then you ironically had the American government coming out and saying we have no reason to believe that the nuclear posture of any of these countries have changed. That's a very interesting way to put it because Russia State TV warns the United States is a nuclear strike will happen and they're in the crosshairs. So very fascinating that while we are being mission creeped towards it, it's like this weird cognitive dissonance of they're telling us like, oh, shoot, Russia tells us they want to kill us all and take over the world. Oh, by the way, don't worry. We got this under control. We see no reason to be worried about the nukes. And Putin's bluffing. I think he's bluffing for now, but, you back this dude into a corner. He's in his 70s, and he's probably a Looney Tune who's been in power most of his life. it's likely that when you back a crazy man into a corner like that, and his options are either lose power and have his country revolt, or use a nuke and stir the pot, see what happens, I think he might choose the latter. But I just find that fascinating. The NATO Secretary General said, "We have not noticed any change in Russia's nuclear status." Oh, well, that's interesting because they just gave nuclear weapons to Belarus, and Belarus says a million people would die immediately as he threatens the world. That's fantastic. As regards to the involvement in the dam, this comes from Sarah Candles on Twitter. She says that Zelensky gave a clear denial of involvement in it. It's possible he was lying or that it was done by partisans without Ukrainians' knowledge. Unlikely, but not impossible. I don't know. I'm sorry, this is not in regards to the dam. This is in regards to the Nord Stream. She said, I don't know who else would have the motivation to do it, but Russia destroys things without motivation. I can see both perspectives, as I said at the beginning. There's so much lying going on. I don't really trust what anybody says anymore. The American government, the Ukrainian government, they all have their motives, and they all play like this is a humanitarian cause. And I think evidence shows that that's contrary to the truth. I think that they help when they see potential and payoff for themselves. What that potential is, I don't know. You hear about the money laundering. You hear about the... You hear about so many different reasons as to why America is actually in Ukraine. The corruption supposedly with Biden and this Burisma stuff. I don't really want to dive into that because it's just a whole other can of worms that could take up a whole episode. But my point being, something fishy is up with this Ukraine stuff. I don't think we're doing it for the right reasons. So I guess I agree with Sarah Candles. I don't know who has the motivation to do it other than Ukraine, but Russia's a little bit of crazy too. MC Glitch on Twitter says that everybody knows the United States did it. It's a desperate attempt to spin this, and it won't fly because the United States knows retaliation will come someday. I don't know if you can say you know the United States did it, but I think that it's plausible. It's very plausible that the guys funding the war and the ones who said on camera that they would like to take out the Nord Stream pipeline would in fact be the people who took out the Nord Stream pipeline. Don't think you have to go out on a limb to guess that. So this comes from Mad World Act Cloud on Twitter. He says, from news articles released, they staged via Poland and attacked NATO infrastructure in an attempt to hurt and blame Russia. Did Ukraine do this alone? The CIA says so, but Ukraine publicly denies it. I bet it was a group effort. I think that's a fair point. If it was Ukraine, I do think they needed help probably to pull it off because they've needed help with this entire operation. If we didn't help them, this shit probably would have been over and they probably would have gotten steamrolled. We already talked about Belarus and the nuclear strike. It's frustrating that NATO would then come out and say, we see no change in the nuclear posture as they threaten to obliterate us all into smithereens. Meanwhile, the leader of Belarus saying he would not hesitate to do that. So, ironic. NATO... This comes from Apex on Twitter. NATO should respond to steps by Russia aiming to deploy nuclear weapons. The Polish president says that they need to respond to that. It's interesting because, the nukes with Belarus borders. Does it border with Poland? I know that they're very close. I'm not sure if they're exact neighbors, but it's a problem for Poland immediately, meaning it's a problem for NATO. How do you respond to something that doesn't just escalate this to bring us into a war? It seems like a lot of these idiots in the government just want that. They don't care because they ain't going to be dying. They're not going to be sending their sons. They're going to be sending innocent people to die. So I do not like when I hear these kind of things of we need to respond, we need to retaliate because... on one perspective, yes, they do need to be shown that we're serious and that, if it came to that, they would not survive it. But at the same time, when you play this tit-for-tat game, man, it just goes up and up and up, and eventually you get to a point where you're looking down the barrel of each other, and it's hard, even possibly a miscalculation could happen, similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were that close, and then, what's his name, Khrushchev, backed off last minute while they're airing this shit on live TV and the ships are facing each other, down the barrel about to launch that thing. So it gets to a point where it's hard to turn it back, and I think our leaders are much less rational than possibly the leaders of the past were. So fascinating times, but we touched on this. The United States preparing evacuation plans for American citizens in Taiwan. Not good. William Green says, no bueno. Unmodder says, hopefully they've learned from the Afghanistan debacle. I'm not optimistic. He's referring to the way we pulled out and would we be able to pull out of Taiwan in a more organized fashion. I don't think so. One thing you got to keep in mind about the Taiwan-China thing is that Taiwan is 90 miles from China. 90 miles? And how far is Taiwan from America? Like 3,000 miles? Those aren't good odds, man. That's not good. I've seen the war games. You've seen some war games that say that America would come out on top, and then you see plenty that say China will come out on top, and hard to believe which one's accurate. But I got to say, just from the perspective of the Chinese, they're only 90 miles off the coast. You know how much easier it would be to resupply. I know they have the carrier cruise missiles that can take out what has been the dominating force of the sea for the past decades and decades. Now can be wiped out with like a fucking $1 million missile. So 90 miles versus 3,000 miles, I don't like them odds. And depending on how fast China did that, I don't see the evacuation going any smoother than Afghanistan did. I think you're going to have people jumping off planes and swimming in the water and all kinds of crazy shit. I hope it doesn't come to that, but crazy times, man. I think we've probably reached a good stopping point. We're going to keep these episodes a little more clear and concise moving forward, but there's just so much to talk about in regards to this, and I've been following this for some time, and I just had to say my piece on it. I think the war is unjustified with Russia and Ukraine, but at the end of the day, I'm terrified that what is killing hundreds of thousands of people could very quickly spiral out of control and kill tens of, if not hundreds of millions of people. You got to think the weapons that were in World War II that were killing 100,000 a week, we can kill 10 times that amount in 5 minutes now, or 15 minutes, however long it takes to travel one of these nukes. And you are backing a angry, crazy person into a corner at the end of his life. And I think our president's also near the end of his life at like 80 years old. So let's think from their perspective. They're in power. They don't want to lose power. They're perfectly content sending others to die for them while they profiteer off of it. And you have domestic, geopolitical, economic, you have every sort of facet of what could stoke a giant war, along with every single team, Axis and allies formed. You got the BRICS nations, you've got NATO, you've got the powder keg of Ukraine, so close with Poland and Belarus, and it's a nightmare, guys. It's a fucking nightmare, and that's why I feel like I have to cover this, because I pray I'm wrong, but it seems like this is an eventuality. So time's going to tell. I will do my best to keep these more clear and concise. I apologize, I'm all over the place, but just wanted to catch you guys up to speed with my thoughts on this entire thing. I'm fascinated that it hasn't happened yet, and possibly that's cause for some optimism. But this ain't the movies, guys. It's not the movies. Things take longer and develop in a way that we might not suspect. So I'd be fucking shocked if we're not at war in the next year or two, be it with China or Russia or a combination of all of them. So fun times, fun stuff. If you guys have any questions or comments or topics, either in the UFC department, the World War III Geopolitical department, or the UFO phenomenon, feel free to email me at mixedmartianartsshow@gmail.com, and I'll feature you on the show. We will be having guests on shortly. As you can see, I just got a little home set up right now, so it's going to take me a little bit of time to organize that. But we will be doing guests, and once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I will be doing live chats. So I think we're at 205 subscribers right now. So if you guys enjoy the show at all, I would really appreciate if you share it on your social media. If you hit the subscribe button on YouTube, you can find my personal Instagram at Austin Michael Music. I'm an artist as well, so feel free to check out my music. And yeah, I'm going to try to get 3 episodes out a week. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is fun for me. I'm not doing it for anything other than talking about stuff that fascinates me. We're at a very crazy inflection point in this world, and UFC we're not at a crazy point, but UFO and World War III related we are. UFC is simply just my favorite sport on the planet, and it could add some lightness to what is potentially turning into a very serious and dark show. So we're going to keep it nonchalant here. But yeah, you guys got questions, send them to me. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I'll try to get another episode out soon. You can also check this out on podcasts, Spotify podcasts, and Mixed Martial Arts. Y'all have a good rest of your day. Sorry for the negative talk. I hope we don't all die in a fiery blizzard soon. So peace out, y'all. Talk to you next time.